There it goes.
Hello, and thank you for joining us on the Anarchist Experience. My name is Robert Kruger. I'm your host, and today I have a couple of guests with me. They're um, from the ANCOM persuasion, typically. I would, at least that's what I understand. Maybe I'm mistaken, but
Patrick's a Marxist.
oh, Patrick's a Marxist. Okay, so we have Patrick and Jake Tompkins from Red Letter, not Red Letter Media, from Red and Black
Revolutionary.
Revolutionary,
Yeah.
Red and Black Revolutionary podcast. Okay. So, let's see here. Just in case you are joining us live, feel free to comment in the chat section. I will certainly see that stuff and try to incorporate it if it's relevant. Okay, so we've done a show before, Jake, and there was some conversation that occurred in the YouTube video comments section that you had continued there, and I wanted to give you a chance to address anything that you wanted to regarding that before we
Right.
dive into whatever it is that we're going to discuss today.
I mean, I guess the main thing, like I was having a conversation with one person in the Hangout, or not in the Hangout, the comments of the YouTube video, and basically we're going back and forth on like whether or not, making someone being like saying, all right, I'm not going to be in a relationship with you unless you become a Christian. Like we were discussing whether that was force or coercion in any type of way. And his argument was basically like, I believe your argument at the time was like, so like basically, well, that's just your right to choose who you want to be in a relationship with. And I think like that depends on the situation. So like, I mean, yeah, I mean, if you're completely turned off by Christians, then yeah, I mean, it would be kind of coercion to make you force you into a relationship that, you weren't, you were completely turned off by. I can understand that. So
Yeah, I
like,
guess the example I was trying to give was, let's say that you're a vegetarian
hmm,
after not being a vegetarian. You become a vegetarian. Uh, your relationship was before you became a vegetarian, and then after becoming a vegetarian, the idea of having a non-vegetarian significant other became disgusting. So
right.
then,
But I think, I think that, yeah, in that example, I could agree that that wouldn't be coercion. But in the example where, say, someone, like, they weren't completely turned off by someone being a Christian, they were just, like, basically doing it to make someone become a Christian. So basically using, kind of like, oh, well, if you don't, become a Christian, I'm going to break up with you and make you really sad because, not because I'm attracted to Christians and that why it would be a prerequisite for the relationship for me being happy, but just because I want you to be a Christian. Like I think that would be kind of obviously authoritarian because you're using emotional coercion on somebody. And I don't really see like. So if we take the basic definition of coercion, basically, limiting someone's choices, limiting someone's freedoms, you're clearly limiting someone's freedoms when you say, all right, I'm gonna, if you don't be a Christian, I don't, you don't, I could be in a relationship with you, and you could be the religious persuasion that you are now. It wouldn't really make that much of a difference to me. But I'm going to force you to be a Christian anyway through, threats of emotional.
yeah. Well, let's just go ahead and look at the definition that just pops up in the Google thing, and it's the practice of persuading someone to do something, but using force or threats. And in
Right.
this particular case, it is a threat. Is what you're saying.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So if you were to say, I'm not comfortable in this relationship, and I'm going to go ahead and move on, they say, well, what can I do to make things better? And you'd say, well, look, I just don't feel comfortable when I'm in a relationship with someone who is a meat eater. It grosses me out. I can't take it anymore.
Hmm.
At this point, that's not coercion.
No, I don't. I wouldn't say so.
Okay. But then if instead you said, I've watched these videos. Holy crap, this stuff is grossing me out. And if you want to be in a relationship with me, you're going to have to stop eating meat.
Hmm. Well, I mean,
That would be
not
coercion.
again. It requires context. So if it's like, if you're not trying to, well, you have to not be trying to emotionally coerce them into taking your persuasion, because that obviously is coercion. And you also have to have like it has to be kind of like not it has to make it pretty much impossible for you to be happy in that relationship, or have the maximum amount of happiness possible in that relationship.
Well, obviously, if you're a
That,
vegetarian and it grosses you out that somebody else is a meat eater and they're in your home having meat in the
right,
home, things like that, that would certainly,
right,
make your experiences suboptimal. Uh,
right, yeah. So like I think in that situation it would be okay as long as you weren't saying, using I guess emotional terrorism and being like, I'm gonna break up with you and insult you and harass you if you don't become a vegetarian, right? But like, and I think where it starts to become coercion is when, all right, you could deal with the meat eating, like you wouldn't really care, but you're just doing it because you want that person to be, a vegetarian. So
okay,
that's where
so
I draw the line because one requires, you to be forced into an unhappy relationship, but the other
correct.
one requires you to force someone into a position that they're not comfortable with using emotional
Yeah.
uh, threats.
I think that a lot of times people have problems with words when they're used. Coercion has a fairly negative connotation,
Mhm.
and when you apply it to things that people just consider to be normal, they get kind of knee-jerk reaction that's not happy. Um, so if we, let's say, for example, a person is in an abusive relationship where the person that they're with becomes verbally berating, telling them that they look ugly, things like that, and the person's in the ultimatum saying, "Hey, look, if you don't cut this shit out and stop, bad mouthing me and saying I look crap, I'm going to leave you."
Mhm.
Coercion. It is coercion. It's defensive coercion. It is an act that is not an aggressive act. It is a defensive act. If
Right, I
you
would.
Yeah, okay. So I guess in the case of the situation where you feel that your relationship is not a good relationship because the other person is eating meat and you're a non-meat eater and you find it disgusting and oppressive, then it is kind of a self-defense act to inform the other person that this is something that is not going to be
Yeah.
acceptable.
I would consider that like establishing your own autonomy in the relationship. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I guess that we've kind of established that a little more clearly for a lot of people. I think that certainly I don't like using the term coercion in that particular situation, but definitively, if you use the dictionary, yeah, it is coercion. So even if it is a somewhat amicable situation, doesn't matter. It's still, you are threatening something in order to get them to change their choices to persuade them. All right, so I guess on this show, unless you had any particular topic that you wanted to bring up, I just wanted to start off with just a kind of like a background thing, just to see if we're on the same page about something. Um, I'd imagine that doing your podcast, you're somewhat well versed in the history of anarchism, and um, it's a fairly new concept in certain respects, but it's also a very very old concept in other respects.
Hmm.
Um, when the ball really started going was primarily in the Russian movement. Would you say?
Well, actually, anarchism has been a kind of historical trend for a long time. So, for
Yeah.
instance, I mean, there was like anarchism has existed for like like there were what was Peter Kropotkin in his book, The Conquest of Bread, describes societies were kind of operating under an anarchist framework, and he describes kind of early anarchism, and there's also you know people talk about sometimes like the anarchist, the anarcho-syndicalist communes and feudal society, and so like it's been a trend for a while. Um,
Yeah, there's certainly been discussions about it, and philosophers who had thought about it, and commentators who have brought it up as concepts, and so on. But as far as like an actual having a significant movement where it was going against an established hierarchical system of government, um, it seems that prior to that we didn't really have a very large movement of anarchist thought. Is basically what I'm saying as far as a counterculture that actually became a fairly large population base.
well, what led up to what happened in the Russian Revolution, if I understand it correctly, was actually kind of like a kind of mass acceptance of anarchist ideas. If you look
Yeah.
at even up to like pre-industrial American history, like pretty much like almost up until very recently, there was a huge anarchist standing around the globe, and it's been beaten back like a lot. But it used to be like a huge thing. There used to be a lot of anarchists, especially around that time, which is I guess why what happened. But
And from my understanding, it was somewhat of a backlash, at least in my understanding, it was a backlash to the oppressive systems that they had going on in that time period.
I mean, it wasn't necessarily like a reaction. It was more just like the cultivation of the idea. So, like what Nestor Makhno did, the guy who kind of spearheaded the Russian movement of anarchists.
Boy.
Okay, I'm gonna. Yeah, let's keep that muted unless you have a comment that you're gonna put in there, if you would, please, Patrick. Okay.
But yeah, what I was saying was like he was the kind of one that spearheaded the movement that at least established the anarchist society, and he was basing a lot of his ideas off of like kind of anarchist theorists. So it was kind of the cultivation of anarchist theory, not just like it wasn't just like a reaction. It was kind of like a thing that happened.
Yeah, he was establishing, the ground. He was taking a groundswell that he had seen before and putting it together. And what I'm saying is that it seems that a very large amount of the adoption came out of people seeing the damage that was being done in that environment.
Right.
Okay. Now, I'm going to claim that it is my contention that the anarchist movement at that time was dealing with a very oppressive regime, and in many cases actually became overzealous in its attempts to overthrow it. That they did what a lot of times people do when they're dealing with things that are very oppressive or difficult to deal with, and they do an all or nothing kind of type of response, where instead of having the ability to discern which elements of each and every single step actually goes into the creation of these negative consequences actually exists. I'll give you an example. In my past, I had a relationship with my father which was really bad. I was very angry, and I essentially said anything and everything that he is and that he supports and is part of is crap, because he's just a complete asshole, blah, 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 blah. Right. And then after a period of time of analyzing the situation, analyzing things in relationship, I realized that, yeah, he does do shit that's bad. And he's actually, got qualities that are things that I can enjoy and accept and actually love. And I think that it's possible that in the case of the anarchism philosophy, it's grown over a very long period of time, but really as far as the amount of intellectual pursuit into the area, it really didn't get like just a huge swell of thought and people going back and forth, bouncing ideas off of each other until this revolution occurred in Russia. And at that time, because of the overbearing nature of the system that they were under, I think that they actually went overboard with their response to what it was that was wrong, blaming all hierarchies when, in all actuality, one of the hierarchies that we very much appreciate and actually enjoy is the hierarchy of the locus of self-control. That I have the final decision-making power over what happens with my body as long as I'm not screwing with somebody else's body. And similarly, there's a hierarchy that occurs within, let's say, a household, that the breadwinner, whether it be male or female, may have the hierarchical number one position and say, all right, well, this is what we're going to do with the house, and then their significant other would have the secondary position, or they might decide to share that position. It doesn't matter. It's still a hierarchical position, because the next closest person, let's say the 17-year-old adolescent,
Hmm.
They have their positions, and then you go down through the family members, and then if there are visitors who are, let's say, cousins or whatever, they might have a next level of authority, and then if you have guests who are visiting who are not family members, they would have a even lower authority and ability, and then you would even go by age, perhaps, that if you have a guest who is, let's say, 65 years old, he has more authority than, let's say, a 14-year-old child. So these hierarchical, power structures exist and they're good things for certain circumstances. And so what I'm saying is that now that we've come into a more modern era where the amount of communication that occurs between populations and between people, especially in philosophy, is that the opportunity for having people who are actually intelligent and capable of making logical thought, actually having a discerning decision, a discerning palate when it comes to how things work, they're going to perhaps be able to overcome some of this knee-jerk responses that I think that you're getting when it comes to the anarchist position from the past. And I believe that when I say that anarcho-capitalism is an evolution and improvement upon what was previously just anarchism, you're going to give me backlash and say, no, it's not. But I think that a lot of the thinkers that you're going to source for your position came from a time where there were very oppressive situation and their reactions were very reactionary. So what do you say to that?
I mean, well, the first thing I'd say is, again, I don't see how it can be classified as simply reaction. If you look at anarchist theory up until that time period, and just in general, it's always been about kind of being a thinker. It was about theory. It was about using historical materialism. It was about using sociology. It was about using all these different social sciences. It wasn't like this kind of knee-jerk reaction thing. It was something that these people were intellectually invested in and said, okay, this is my worldview. It wasn't like, all right, well, this system is bad, so I must be an anarchist. It wasn't necessarily like that.
Right.
Also,
I'm not saying that it was reactionary solely. I'm saying that was an influence in that situation.
I mean, I guess, but only in the way that they thought the system was bad. Only in the way that they could look around and look at what these anarchists were reading and saying, okay, well, this is bad. In the same way that ANCAPs do today. It's not like ANCAPs would do. Anybody who's looking at the system and saying, all right, there needs to be some things improved, I mean, they're looking at the system and then having the reaction that, okay, this is bad. So it's not something that ANCAPs can be absolved of.
Oh no, we've got our own shit. We've got we're against warfare to a degree that perhaps might be overzealous. I don't know. I can't really say. I would think that it is appropriate for us to just be absolutely against all preventative war, where we go over there and make sure that all the potentially bad guys who are going to potentially do bad things. I think that that's a bad thing, regardless. But it's possible that I'm just being reactionary there, and I guess reactionary is kind of a curt term to use in that example. Maybe it's just I don't know, tainted by my understanding of the world, given the incredible militaristic imperial nation that we live under. It's just ridiculous. I mean, I'm sure that you're with me on that. We're definitely against the imperialism of America around the world, right?
Right.
Yeah. All right. So back to where you were talking. Please continue with your commentary on that.
So, like, the thing I would say is that I'm saying that looking around the world and having a reaction is not bad. That's actually something you need to do if you're going to have an analysis of anything. I don't care.
Oh yes, absolutely.
And that's what the anarchists did. I don't think they did it to a fault. I think, and if you're talking about the Russian, I mean, maybe you could make the argument, and you definitely could, that, the Spanish anarchists were a bit brutal in their reactions to, say, religious institutions. And a lot of the institutions that they were fighting against. But the Russian Revolution, it didn't really seem to me that they were doing that. Like, so, for instance, Makhno's movement. It didn't really they didn't have the same characteristics in that the Spanish anarchists did. They weren't like, killing a bunch of nuns and priests and shit. Like they were, they didn't have that characteristic. Also, I would say that, you said that anarcho-capitalism is a kind of improvement on traditional forms of anarchism, and like whether it's an improvement, whether it's a better ideology is obviously something we can dispute all day. But I don't see where ANCAPs are coming from and seeing themselves as a form of anarchism. Because if you look at anarchism throughout the history of anarchism as a political philosophy, it's always been established as, like a lot of the values, not even just the anti-capitalism, but just a lot of the values in general are completely contradictory to what ANCAP values. So that's why I don't really take it seriously when people are like, oh, well, I'm an anarcho-capitalist. ANCAP, my response is always ANCAP has nothing to do historically with the anarchist tradition. In fact, it's contrary to many of its principles.
It's a bit extreme to say nothing to do with. I mean, we're for the ending of government and the government largesse, having lobbyist power ruling over whether people.
I'm exaggerating to a point, obviously, but I'm not saying it has absolutely nothing to do. There's very few ideologies that have nothing to do with each other, but
it's true.
It's not an outgrowth of anarchism. It's its own thing.
I don't know. I think that a lot of the anarcho-capitalists will cite sources that you would cite, that we would use material that was written by, let's say, Spooner, which you would use, right?
Well, I mean, Spooner wasn't an ANCAP, though. He was definitively against private property.
However, we cite material that he wrote and things that he said which we agree with. And similarly, I mean,
that's true. I mean, Spooner did have, there is ground to be covered. There is mutual ground, but I'm saying, like, just because there's mutual ground between an ideology doesn't mean that that ideology is an outgrowth of the other ideology. So, for instance, we could take the fact that Judaism and Christianity have, common ground on some levels, on a lot of levels actually, but they're not correlated. Judaism is not an outgrowth of Christianity. I mean, it comes from the same kind of religious places.
But Christianity is an outgrowth of Judaism.
It's not but like outgrowth. I'm using the word outgrowth wrong. I'm sorry, but like I'm not saying it's not a sect of Judaism. It's its own thing, right?
Well, no, not necessarily. You can certainly find people who philosophically would say yes, actually, Christianity is just it's an evolution of Judaism. Absolutely.
Well, regardless of whether people will say that or not, the discussion is about whether that's actually the case, not whether people.
I would say it definitely is, because the first, the Old Testament is basically the Torah.
Well, yeah. Again, it comes from the same religious place, but it's not like a sect. So, for instance, like it couldn't be considered under the broad umbrella of Judaism. It just has common places where. So it originated, like a lot of the ideas came from Jewish beliefs, but it's not under the umbrella of Judaism. It's like I could say, all right, well, ANCAPs have some beliefs that are similar to anarcho-communists, but I don't they're not an outgrowth of each other. They just have common ground. That's all I'm saying. I mean, you could disregard the Christianity example if you don't think it's true. But I'm just saying, like, common ground does not equal the fact.
Yeah, but common ground arrived from a different source or a different methodology is not the same. That's obviously not the same. So, for example, languages use sounds and intonations in order to communicate. All right. Mm-hmm. Now, if you took the Aboriginal Australian and said that his language is derivative of Cantonese, you could say, no way, that's crap. There's no way. They're not at all related. Okay, that Latin is like the root for where Aboriginal clicking noise sound language came from is complete crap. You can obviously see that. But when you say something like anarcho-capitalism is not based in anarchist tradition, that's crap. It is. It is based in anarchist tradition. It's a melding of an understanding of how freedom is best pursued by having people be able to own the fruits of their labor, including capital. I would
make the argument that the exact opposite of what you're saying is true. Because if you look at ANCAP and the kind of ideological roots of that, it comes from kind of, ideologies that would be like basically spat on by traditional anarchists. So if traditional anarchism comes from people like Kropotkin and Emma Goldman and those people who are fiercely anti-capitalist, those people who are fiercely socialist and communist, and even had a lot of influence, economic influence, by Karl Marx. So I don't think we do ourselves I don't think we have a correct case when saying that ideology came from, or that ANCAP, an ideology that comes from neoclassical traditions with different conceptions of freedom, with different conceptions of how the world works, different economics, different conceptions of social science. I don't think that we can say that has roots in traditional anarchism, because they come from two completely different places. So honestly, I would say that
Wouldn't you say that traditional anarchism comes from Plato?
From what?
Plato or Socrates or any of the original?
Plato. I don't think either of them were anarchists in any sense.
Okay. All right. So then we're going to have, I guess, to disagree about that one then.
I'm honestly not that familiar. I would need to read more of them. But from what I understood, they both favored kind of a state structure. They were not anarchists.
Yeah. Well, I guess
they didn't have.
Oh no, not that. I guess I don't know enough about Plato or Socrates to say, but there's certainly a very long lineage that went back even further than the Russian.
I mean, anarchism by my definition, it's again fiercely anti-capitalist, and when I believe one of them, Plato or Socrates, when capitalism was first opening up its markets, they were heralding it as the best thing on earth. So I don't.
Right. Okay, so I guess what I guess what we're going to have to disagree on is that the anarchists the anarchism that I hold dear within my understanding of anarcho-capitalism is based upon the tradition that people don't have a right to tell you what to do with your life, and with what it is that you make with your life.
Right.
And unless you've done something in which you've obligated yourself to them. Let's say, for example, if you I don't know, if you slap somebody, they now have some authority to do something in your life because you've done something with their life. All right, so
yeah, I mean, I would just say that there is common ground, but it comes from different places.
Yeah, the thing that I really want to make clear is, as far as I understand it, anarcho-capitalism did not necessarily evolve from the Ayn Rand branch of understanding of the world.
Well, not necessarily Ayn Rand, but it evolves from kind of a specific school of laissez-faire capitalism and a specific school of that strand of thought. It comes from, again, neoclassical traditions, such as people like Mises, such as people like Friedman, Rothbard. Yes, Rothbard was, I believe, he was the guy who made up the word.
Yeah. All right. So then let's actually just let's accept that. All right. I'm fine with that. Let's move forward. All right. Anarcho-capitalism does not have its origins in the original anarchist thought.
Right.
All right. So then, traditional anarchist thought is, obviously, things are fallible. It's possible that might not be right. Correct?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think any theory is correct. I mean, there are flaws that we can point out in any.
Sure.
I could make the argument that, well, traditional anarchism is flawed because, it doesn't have ice cream falling from the sky or something. It's nothing.
Yeah. No, I'm talking about actual logical, etymological flaws, flaws that where they didn't explore the actual, that they actually conflated two different systems, one being a voluntary hierarchical relationship and a non-voluntary hierarchical relationship. That one is actually a positive and the other one, because it is violent, is not. So similar to how if you exchange things, violence, violence between two people creates a totally different paradigm than what the two different people would do if, let's say, it's trade. If it's trade, happy. All right. If it's, I'm going to hit you if you don't give me that, not happy.
Mm.
Robbery. Similarly, if you were to take it with any other type of thing like having somebody stay at your home, you're
Yeah.
going to stay at my home. you know,
Right.
by initiating the violence in there, it becomes a tainted version of what it would be normally having a guest versus having a prisoner.
Mhm.
So the idea that a hierarchical structure can exist where it is a positive and a benefit.
Well,
Um,
that's the thing I wanted to hit on before. The kind of like, and I think this is partly Ancom's fault because I see a lot of them running around the Facebook groups and such, going, "Oh well, and anarcho-communists are against all hierarchy." That's not the case. I mean, if you look at any, like just look at anarchist theory, anarcho-communist theory, whatever, like any theory of anarchism, what it is it's about questioning hierarchy and replacing, like, so it's specifically hierarchical social relations. So questioning hierarchical social relations, and if they are found to be illegitimate, replacing them with a better social relation.
well, that's
It's
awesome.
Yeah, it's not a complete opposition to any hierarchy. In fact, there are many social hierarchies that ANCOMs would advocate. So we advocate that consensus-based structures should be placed above kind of authoritarian structures. So we're not against social hierarchy. We're against we're for making, I guess, social relationships the most autonomous possible and the best they can be possible.
So there's some questions being asked in the chat here about the source, the origin of the word anarchy and the etymology of the word being "and" with "out" and "archy" ruler. And then obviously the tradition of anarchy is a tradition of without unchallenged hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
Being, anarchy, both it and hierarchy both use archy in their concept and in structure. So I guess there is obviously some relationship there. The thing that I would bring to bear is that when the anarchists of old came up with the choice of the word anarchy,
Mm-hmm.
it could have just been a marketing term, that it just sounds right in their time period.
Right.
That it didn't necessarily have to do with specifically the etymology only,
Right.
and so it may have actually been very much the type of anarchy that you guys are talking about, where you're saying look at all the all the anarchists of the time period. There's nobody there talking about having capitalism at all.
Right.
So legitimately, I could say to you that all right, yeah, maybe we don't have the origins from the anarchist tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm fine with that. I think that ANCAPs try a lot to try to wedge themselves into like a subset or a branch or part of your
Right.
particular origins, and maybe we're not. Maybe we've come up with something better. Who knows? We'll have to figure that out in these types of discussions. But I think that you've given me at least enough information that I can at least accept that on my part. That the origins of the philosophy are not coming from the anarchist tradition. It is actually coming from a more neoliberal type of, I don't know, maybe more individualist type of approach.
Right.
Yeah. And then your type of anarchism was probably coming from a more, I don't know, solidarityist.
Well, I mean, the best way I could describe that would be there's typically two trains of thought when it comes to that kind of stuff. It's philosophical individualism and philosophical collectivism. Anarchists generally have a mix of that, while as ANCAPs have they favor philosophical individualism. While again, anarchists, they favor a merging of philosophical individualism and philosophical collectivism. So I guess a balance between the two.
Yeah, I would say that realistically, to put that claim on anarcho-capitalists is kind of a bit disingenuous. There are certainly anarcho-capitalists who are proponents of a very collectivist type of perspective that in order to have the most benefit and the most prosperous prosperity for the collective, we believe that by respecting the rules of engagement, in that if you put in the labor, it's yours, creates this wealth that benefits all. Now, I'm not one of them. I tend to think that the benefit for the individual is important. The benefit for the society is important, but to me, the big thing is the detriment to the individual is automatically a detriment to the society.
Right. I mean, I understand where you're like coming from on that. There, if I think about it, I can definitely point out times where ANCAPs have merged philosophical individualism with philosophical collectivism. But I would say generally ANCAPs. I mean, it kind of like what I've seen from ANCAPs is basically just been a 50-50 split where it's either been philosophical individualism merged with philosophical collectivism, or just philosophical individualism. So there is a variation. You are correct on that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I guess then moving forward, thank you for clarifying that with me and helping me come to a clearer understanding of it. I think that it's a hard one to dispute, even though we can always point at the etymology of the word and say, "Ha, I gotcha." I mean, realistically, the tradition is fairly well established that it was communist.
Yeah,
so,
well, I mean, it didn't have to necessarily be communism, but it was definitely a socialism.
Yeah. Okay. And really, what's the difference between socialism and communism?
Well, I mean, there's, I think, distinctions. So, communism necessitates, Communism necessitates a stateless, classless, moneyless, and socialist society, right? Where resources are distributed from each according to their ability to each according to their needs, right?
Okay.
Socialism is less. Socialism doesn't have all of that. Socialism is simply the democratic control of the means of production, right? So socialism differs because communism. I mean, socialism is entailed in communism, but they're two different concepts.
Okay, so it's kind of consensusism.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now, another thing that I find that a lot of times people who are from both parties, both sides, get into a big pissing match over is the definition of terms.
Right.
We've gone through the anarchist thing. We're not anarchists. Okay, fine. We are, as far as the etymology goes, but we're not coming from the same tradition. So, if you don't mind, can we just use the name? Sorry. Okay. But then, the other word that really gets people's craw is the word ownership.
Right.
That pisses people off something fierce. When anarcho-capitalists or voluntarists say, "I own myself,"
right,
your reaction's probably going to be like, "Ah, what the hell are you talking about? You can't sell yourself," and that kind of thing.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty much like this word that just irritates the hell out of everybody. So I just want to make clear what it is that I'm saying that owning oneself is, and get your comment on what it is, how you feel about that particular position. Okay. I claim that I am the final moral, righteous, whatever. I have the legitimate final decision-making authority over myself.
Right.
That's what we mean by saying ownership.
Well, yeah, I mean, I definitely understand that. I know that when ANCAPs say self-ownership, they're trying to imply self-determination, excuse me. They're trying to imply self-determination.
It's not necessarily self-determination, because, my self-determination would say, I want to be able to fly through the galaxy like, some superhero. But that's just not going to happen.
Well, I mean, self-determination... I mean, any kind of, self-determination is basically means what you described, being able to have the final decision-making power over yourself.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's they're kind of the same concept.
Does that term or that phrase, the way that I said it, does that sound legitimate as far as you're concerned? Do you feel that people should...
Well, I mean, I like saying self-determination better, because my problem with the concept of self-ownership is the concept of self-ownership comes from the idea that you own yourself. All right?
Yeah. Well, let's drop the word ownership. I'm asking you the phrase, specifically the phrase that I used, which is final authority.
I mean, I have no problem with that.
Okay.
I just have a problem when ANCAPs they use the word ownership, and when they try to convey ideas of self-determination through the ownership of oneself.
Yeah, it is kind of a conflation that occurs where they're using mixed meanings of terms. I mean, the word ownership can mean a variety of different things, and specifically when it's coming to property, it's a different concept than
Right. I mean,
yeah.
like, the concept of self-ownership for me, where it fails, is they try to make the self a property, like I guess in their terms, an ownership claim. So it's kind of like their conception of private property. So something I have an ownership claim to, and they
Well,
try
I
to
mean,
convey that. Right.
realistically, the big thing that comes up when we talk about self-ownership is then somebody will say, well, then that means that you could sell yourself, and that means slavery is okay.
Right. I mean, that's the typical. That's part of the response I would give. There's also another part, but
Okay, well, let's drill into that one. Um, Individual sovereignty or final authority over oneself. Um, Given the current technology that we have, is not it's not something that can be usurped or sold. It's physically impossible.
okay, but we were talking about this before.
Yeah.
My problem with that is that when we were talking about self-ownership, we're not talking about what is in the realm of physical ability. We're talking about in the realm of
Concepts.
social conditions, right? So of social rules. So like the social rule that ANCAPs are talking about is the right to own yourself. So if I have the right to own myself in terms of social rules, then I have the right to transfer ownership of myself in terms of social rules, and thus the social rules will now dictate that someone else has the ownership claim over me. So it has nothing to do with what you are physically able to do. It has more to do with social rules and the right, who has the rights to what.
Okay. All right. So I guess the thing that I would say is that the concept of actually selling oneself, the only way that it works is if you cease to be, because it's not something that you can actually accomplish. It's impossible for you to, let's say, for example, sell a building that you can't give the other person access to.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If they go into the building, if they can't, change the light bulbs in the building, you can't sell them the building.
Well, I mean, ownership. It's not coming from a place again of ability, like physical ability. It's not coming from that place. It's again coming from a place of social rules. So I may not have the ability to go into a building, but
social rules are based in reality, right?
Well, no, social rules are a metaphysical concept.
Right, but let's say that we make a social rule that humans can fly without.
Like we can have. Well, no, like social rules again. It's not again. Social rules are never kind of statements about what people can physically do. It's statements about what philosophically people should be able to do and should not be able to do. So yeah, we could philosophically say that if we can fly, people should be able to fly. But that doesn't mean that we're going to be able to fly.
All right. So I guess then the philosophical claim that when people are saying ownership is just a really bad way of saying it, because the terms should be that as long as I am a sentient, a entity of self, that I am the final authority over myself.
Right.
And this is not something that can be changed.
Right. That's what I always tell NCAPs. I think that they would be much better off using the word self-determination and having the final authority over myself. Like
there was a mention here that he said individual sovereignty.
Yeah, that's a fine word. You should that would be perfectly fine if they use that term.
Okay.
The term self-ownership, that runs into problems for me.
Yeah, it does. It does. It really creates a lot of linguistic troubles that are not necessary.
Right.
And I think part of the reason why people use it, though, is so that they can create a conflation between individual sovereignty and property ownership.
Right.
Because if you use the same word, ownership, own self, well, then you're denying me the ability to own other stuff. I don't know myself, blah, blah, blah. So, individual sovereignty, or I like the term final authority.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I
would
agree.
Okay. So, all right. So let's just move forward with the final authority. Now, if someone says you can't do X, Y, or Z with object, I don't know, let's say that rock.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, is that not an authority claim?
I think it is an authoritative claim, but I wouldn't say that. I would think. I think depending on what is being said that you can't do with the rock, like that's going to depend on whether the social relation is authoritarian or not. So yeah, it's an authoritarian claim, but it's not necessarily an authoritarian social relation,
I think you're going to have to go into a little more detail on that.
right? So like authoritarianism and social relations comes from social like it pertains to social relations where there is a top-down mode of control of one entity by another.
Oh no. That's not what I'm going to say that I want to talk about. All right. What I'm saying is, let's say that there is.
Well, I mean, you were talking about like, is that an authoritarian? So like,
Well, yeah, perhaps perhaps that's a misstatement of my statement.
I'm making a distinction between the use of authority, what you're talking about, and authoritarian social relations.
Right, and perhaps it was a mistake on my part to say authoritarian, but it's just because English language is kind of difficult to work with sometimes. But is someone establishing a claim of authority? Are they making a claim of authority when they say you cannot use this for that?
I would say they are, yeah.
Okay, and so when I were to, let's say if I were to go out into the wilderness, we're on some desert island or whatever, we've never been out there together. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that none of us have ever seen out there, and we just I'm going out and exploring, and I find something.
Right.
Let's say it's I don't know, a piece. I find a piece of wood floating in the waters, and I take that wood and I bring it back, and I use some rocks to carve it into something else, or I'm starting to.
Right.
And then another person would say, "Hey, wait! You can't take that wood and carve it like that."
Mm-hmm.
The two claims are both claims of authority over this object.
Mm-hmm.
One is a claim that, well, I found it, no one else was using it, no one else had claimed authority over it, at least as far as I knew.
Mm-hmm.
Then the other person is saying, well, I have a claim of authority because it's stuff that we all have access to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this is the crux of the difference between the anarcho-capitalist position and the anarcho-communist position, is that there's stuff out there, stuff that we may not even know exists. There might be elements buried in the planet that we don't even know.
Mm-hmm.
And the claim of the anarcho-capitalist is that if you go through the effort and labor, and you mix your fruit, your labor with that which is out there, that unless somebody else has done this, done it beforehand, they have done what's called homesteading and made it, appropriated it for themselves and made it theirs.
Right.
Okay, and the anarcho-communist would say no, that all your bases belong to us. The whole world is everyone's. And for you to usurp something from this collective ownership is theft. So is that that buys into what it is that your position would be?
So are you asking if I adhere to the homesteading theory of property?
Oh no, I'm saying that you would adhere to the.
Oh wait, you're the ANCOM position that you were. Yeah, I mean, like I mean, to some extent, I think that I believe in what's called usury. So I think, like many other ANCOMs do, that people should be able to control that which they are directly affected by. So that's what I think. So if you are directly affected by something, then you should have an ownership claim over it.
Okay, so in the case of somebody going out into the forest and picking up some driftwood, which was not affecting you at all, and then claiming ownership of it, that would not be something that you would be against?
No. If there was like no effect that could have on me directly, then no.
Okay. Well, that's kind of sounding like a very in-cap position.
I don't think it is, because ANCAPs, their conception of property, as you just outlined, was the homesteading theory. So they said, all right, if you trade something, if you trade for something in the voluntary market, and then you homestead it, or so either you do one of those two things, then your property claim is legitimate. So no matter if that property like directly affects other people, because you did the homesteading and because you did the trading in the market, whichever it may be, where both, I guess there could be a situation where both could happen for one object. But because you did that, like, it doesn't matter if other people have.
But you're missing a critical point. You're missing a critical point to the homesteading claim.
Okay.
Is that no one else has homesteaded it. And when you say that it affects you, that you're engaging, interacting.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine to point out. So
then you've already homesteaded it.
Right.
No,
like, I understand that's a part of it. Like, I did forget that part, so that's fair to point out.
So I mean, clearly, let's say, for example, if somebody wanted to claim ownership of the sun, doesn't matter if you get on a spaceship, fly all the way out there, and put, I don't know, some sort of dome around it, or not dome, but sphere. I forget what the name of the sphere is, where it absorbs all the light from the sun to provide power, but it's in ring world or whatever. That would be illegitimate because you've already homesteaded the light from the sun. You've homesteaded it as a source of light for your family, for your trees, for your plants, all of these different things. Similarly, if there's a path that goes to a lake, for example, and it's a community group where we're all going down this path to, go fishing. All of our footprints have made this path, and then somebody goes and plops down a toll booth or a bridge and starts, in actually there's even a bridge that didn't exist. They build a bridge, and then they say, all right, well, if you're going to climb, if you're going to go this way over my bridge, you're going to have to pay the toll. Well, that's not legitimate because the land, the use of the property of the property has already been established. That we've all been using it. It may be communal, but we've all been using it.
Okay.
Okay. So, in the case of something like that, it's hard to determine what percentage each property owner might have, because we're all communally using it. But realistically, you could say that, all right, well, the fishermen who actually travel upon that route are the owners. And they could potentially, create an agreement and sell ownership of the path to one of them for some reason. That could happen. But in those types of circumstances, it's kind of rare for that kind of a thing to happen because it's so diluted.
Right.
It's hard to imagine somebody says, well, yeah, I guess I'll just no longer walk upon that path if you're going to give me X, Y, and Z.
Right.
Yeah. All right, so now that that's been cleared up, then, are there other problems that you have with this homesteading principle? My
problem is that I feel that it negates, like, the principle of usury. So, say, for example, I mixed my labor with natural forces that had not had their labor been mixed with yet, right?
Right.
I mixed my labor with natural forces, like what ANCAPs talk about, and thus that had not been, previously fucked with. And I make some So I make some tools, or I could have voluntarily traded something that I had before that I'd gotten through voluntary trade in the market or from homesteading. And then given it, to the person who had the tools, and then taken the tools, right? And that was all through homesteading or voluntary exchange that he got the tools as well. So so that premise is set up, right? And then, right, so and then basically, I have the ownership claim over those tools. Right. But now today I say, okay, well, like Jim comes over to my house and says, all right, hey man, can I use those tools? And I say, okay, yeah, sure, we can share them and we can work on this car together or something, right? What happens is now that Jim is now using those tools now directly affect Jim. But I still have the ownership claim over that, right? So because of my homesteading and because of my voluntary trade in the market, whatever it happens to be. And so now I get full ownership claims over something that affected Jim also. And the ethical claim that I would make is, why wouldn't you not want people who are directly affected by things to control those things? It seems like a basic form of autonomy to be able to control that which directly affects you. If you can't control that which directly affects you, I mean, that's the very definition of, you know, I guess, being subjugated and having your autonomy destroyed. So, I mean, that's
Well,
another.
the thing that I would say is that it didn't affect you until we made an agreement beforehand. So it wasn't something that was affecting you. And then after you and I came to an agreement, voluntary accepted, this is the way it's going to work, plan moving forward, then, if you don't accept those terms ahead of time, then those terms don't exist, and I continue to maintain control over my tools, and you never use them. So the usury never happens.
Yeah, but that's the problem. If first of all, it doesn't account for structural violence, which is something that we always get into it over.
Well,
but,
yeah, I mean,
but it also doesn't account
let's
for the.
leave the structural violence conversation for later. But
All right. All right. Well, if we're going to take that out of the discussion, then it also doesn't account for the fact, like the conditions within the relationship. So it's only focusing. It's truncated in the fact of it's only focusing on, what we've done before the relationship has been constructed, and not focusing on what happens within the relationship. Because within the relationship, even though he's accepted to it voluntarily, he's now in a relationship where he does not get to control that which he uses. So he's still having his autonomy violated within the relationship.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's going to make me go into one of those things that I know that ANCONs just love to rib us about when it comes to ANCAPs just making claims, and it's the reason why I bring it up though is just to show how ludicrous this concept is. All right, so I get into a relationship with a woman, and I'm using her vag. Okay, and I've got usury of that vag, and at some point in time, she says, "You no longer have usury of my vag. This is something I'm no longer going to allow you to use." But I was using it. Why shouldn't I still maintain the same relationship that I had grown accustomed to? It's part of what I know as having my ability of self-determination, because I really liked using that vag. It's obviously ludicrous. The idea.
I think that's a bit truncated because it doesn't account for the fact that you're not going to you're going to have to compromise your principles sometimes. So even if I talk about the nap, I can construct a situation where the nap would be unacceptable, right?
No, you cannot.
Yeah, you can.
No.
I mean, so for instance, let's say that the entirety of the world was dependent, like their lives were dependent on you violating the nap. Obviously, then it would be unacceptable.
Okay.
So,
let me be clear about what it is the nap is, because a lot of times people get this wrong, and I would say Wikipedia has it wrong. I would say that a very, almost every ANCAP that I've talked with has it wrong. They express it wrong because, probably because Molyneux says it wrong.
Okay.
Okay? All right. The non-aggression principle is a principle that explains when violence is justified. That's it. It does not say a moral claim about whether something is moral or immoral.
Okay. I mean, well, I guess I don't agree, but I don't really feel like getting into that discussion. But the point I'm trying to illustrate that example.
I'll give you the example that you were talking about. Let's say that, for example, that we've got a situation where we've got a deadly disease that's traveling the planet. There's one person who has a bone marrow that apparently is resistant to it. We can create a vaccine and a cure from this bone marrow. The person will have to die in order for that to happen. Would I kill this person, take their bone marrow, and give it to the rest of the world in vaccine / cure form? Absolutely, without a doubt, 100%, yes, I would. I would violate that person's rights. I would not try to persuade them. I would just take it.
Yeah, right.
And I would fully expect that after I had saved the rest of the world, that the person's family, his, whether business partners, whatever, whatever, so on and so forth, all of these different groups that may have had some impact, were impacted by his death, his or her death, would then have a claim against me and could seek redress, and I would have to either seek their absolution or face the punishment. And so, in that particular case, I've saved the world, yes, but I'm still accepting the non-aggression principle, which means you guys get to use violence against me because I did it. I'd still do it, but you guys have every right and every authority, and it makes perfect sense for you guys to feel that this was not acceptable for me to go ahead and kill this person, and to do violence unto me to seek redress or demand, in order for me to obtain absolution, whatever that absolution would
Well, I mean,
require.
we can argue over that ethical claim, as much as we want, but for the sake of for the productiveness of the conversation, so that it actually goes somewhere, and we don't just end up arguing, okay, is it okay to kill X number of people to save X number of people?
Yeah. Yeah,
So
I mean, but
we don't get into that
see that it
discussion.
doesn't break
What
that.
I was trying to highlight is that if you would ethical principles, they come with the ability for exceptions in certain situations, right? So, there may be a situation where I would compromise my principles for a greater good. That doesn't mean I don't accept those principles as being inconsistent. It just means there's a situation where I wouldn't accept those principles, but I still overall think that principle is a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. Same thing is true of the non-aggression principle. I mean, autonomous crime rights, you can violate the non-aggression principle whenever you like. You'll just be guilty of aggression and the consequences that come along with it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, the non-aggression principle is accepting that violence being done to you, if you're initiating aggression, is appropriate. Okay. So then, let's get back to the idea that, all right, I'm making a claim that says, all right, I made a tool through the manipulation of matter that was affecting no one else. Okay, and then now that I've got the tool, if I'm going to make an exchange with someone as far as letting them use it, you're somehow saying that I cannot make strings. I can't put strings attached to it in order for that to happen, which is then making you have that's a claim of authority over my tool, right?
I would say that, though. I would say that everybody within the given social relation where those tools are used, so everybody who uses those tools and is directly affected by them, that means that all of them have to have equal decision-making power through consensus democracy in that relationship.
Okay, so this is two claims of authority over what happens with this thing.
Right.
Okay. All right, so let's say instead of it's a tool, I go out into the wilderness, I chop down trees.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, nobody else sees that I chop down trees. Nobody even knows that the trees exist. Nobody knows that this piece of land is out there. All right, and so then I go out there and I use those trees to make a log cabin.
Mm-hmm.
I make a little flower garden, a bed, and so on. All right, and so I'm living in this place, and then some of the other people on the island end up wandering out there, and they see this place.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now at this point, there are two claims of authority. One is I've converted this through my labor.
Mm-hmm.
This is mine. And the other person's claim is, well, you're using all our stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's ours.
Mm-hmm.
Is that legitimate? Between the two claims, your claim, my claim, or is it different?
Are you asking what my ethical stance on that would be?
What is the communist?
I mean,
or the socialist stance on that?
The socialist stance. Socialism. It's not a universal theory of ownership.
Yeah.
It's specific to means of production. But I can give you my ethical statement on that.
Okay.
As somebody who's a socialist who has socialist values.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that in your example, I don't know, is the person is the stuff that they're using to make the house, was that being used by other people and then came along and took it?
No, never. Nobody ever used it.
So it has nothing to do with anybody else. It's just him.
Yeah, and then we end up wandering out into the wilderness and see it.
Hmm. Okay. So you wander out into the wilderness and see it. All right.
Yeah.
So the question I would ask is his house directly affecting you in any way?
Well, now that I can see it, sure.
Okay. So now that you can see it, that's perfectly legitimate. So that goes into why ANCOMs feel that communities should be controlled democratically. So, for instance, we instead of just randomly homesteading and trading off goods, we actually have democratic coordination of the distribution of goods, so that everybody has an equal say in that distribution, which ultimately affects them. So yeah, it's going to be affected by the, like the people in the community where there's a forest, they're going to be affected by the use of that forest. So they need to have a say in how that forest is used.
So who determines whether whether you're part of the community or not? I mean, I would assume that you're not going to include the person from Zimbabwe's choices in whether or not let's say we live in Tijeras, New Mexico.
It depends. It depends on, like, again, the principle is if you're directly affected by it. So if the person in Zimbabwe is not directly affected, then they should have. Then I'm going to say no. They're not going to have. They shouldn't have a say.
Well,
But
the thing is,
so for example, if we have a forest fire,
yeah,
and that smoke ends up in Zimbabwe and ends up like choking him to death or some shit, then yeah. So I mean, then that's where, like, I mean, in some sense, the use of things has a global effect, right? And so that's why what anarcho-communists advocate and anarchists in general advocate is kind of a network of global communities that coordinate the distribution of resources cooperatively, right?
Yeah. Oh, okay, so the person who's in Zimbabwe, he makes the butterfly effect claim, which basically is far-fetched conjecture about, all right, well, if you cut down this particular tree in order to build that particular cabin over there, you're going to change the air patterns and thus cause the rainfall to change around the planet, and so therefore, no, I'm not going to approve of you guys building a log cabin over there. Or in fact, let's say instead of that, maybe they make this other claim. They say, well, I can't make a log cabin over here, and I'm going to have a life that is full of inadequacy because you have stuff that I can't possibly have.
Right. I mean, that ultimately gets into the structural violence claim, though, does it not?
Well, no, I think that the structural violence claim is
like, you're depriving me of a house, and therefore, you have authority over me, and I am being subjugated. My autonomy is being violated. Then that's a claim about structural violence. And structural violence is, basically deprivation that leads to authoritarian social relationships.
Okay. Well, I've got a different perspective on structural violence, and we can go into that. But I just, I would want to, just have you specifically ask you to when the claim is obviously, I don't know, ludicrous, like the butterfly effect thing.
I don't think that's ludicrous, though. I think it's perfectly fair to assume that the kind of geographical, the use of the use of.
Okay. Well, let's say that the science behind it, shows that no, it has negligible, if no effect.
Well, then no, I'd say no because it doesn't directly affect him.
But the other person claims that
talking about like the real world without the hypothetical example, the science behind that is actually pretty fair. Like you can say that the use of X piece of land could very well have an effect on part of the globe because the globe is, it's pretty much one rock. So chip a piece, you're going to get an effect.
Okay. Now, the weird thing is that the anarcho-capitalists actually have a resolution for this.
Mm-hmm.
It's called property rights.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact is that when this person living in Bangladesh or Zimbabwe has a change in their property because of, as a direct result, a causal relationship can be determined between your actions and causing damage to their property. They have a claim against you, and then you have to amend it, and you have to make it right.
I see two problems with that. Number one, the capitalist system is based, right, and I think we can agree on this, on kind of exchanges and kind of homesteads, right? So, coming across things, mixing your labor with them, and exchanging things in the market.
No.
What happens then is you get what's called irrational collectivism, which is where basically you have a social body that is participating in social relationships but does not have the proper information to run them. Because what's happening is there's so many blind exchanges and accumulations of property that there's not any collective coordination going on, there's not any gathering of information going on, it's kind of just blind accumulation. And so what happens in that situation is you get these kind of and this is where they claim that capitalism leads to monopolies. You get these kind of like huge wealth and property monopolies that people can then use to corrupt social bodies in their interest to carry out their will. So say the guy in Bangladesh or wherever the fuck we're talking about, he gets up enough wealth and property to persuade a social body of people with guns to, basically fend off any kind of, social body that would enforce the other person's claim that's being affected by his property, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we can see this, just in the modern day system.
No, we can't. That's a tainted example. That's like saying, well, we can see exactly how sex is violent when all we have to do is look at rape. It's obviously wrong-headed. We know that we live in an environment where everything is tainted and twisted by a government monopoly.
But I'm not even talking about government. I'm like completely absent government involvement. If you look at court cases, right, where people, or just even cases like even where the court's not involved, there is constant kind of manipulation by companies to their favor against the workers, and basically there's for their own interest and profit, and they're able to do this because of the wealth and property that they own. So, for instance, the reason if we go over in a third world country, the reason those conditions are so bad is because there's no
There's no what?
labor regulations, and capitalists are able to use their wealth monopolies and property monopolies to basically inflict whatever kind of conditions they want on the workers.
Okay. Well, let's go through a couple of things. All right. Are you familiar with the thing called the Enclosure Act?
You're like cutting out.
Are we getting a little bit of lag? All right. Let's see. Can you hear me now? Is it working?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, it seems to be working.
Are we getting some latency? All right. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
All right. All right. Well,
I think we might be experiencing a delay.
Okay, we're experiencing some sort of delay. All right. So then I'll try to ask my question and then let give some time, and then you can respond.
I think it might have.
Okay. Also, if you have anything using the internet, please, try to close it down.
Can you hear me?
I think it might have. Yeah, I can hear you. All right. All right. So he's getting some latency. So Kenji asks.
Hold on for a second. I'm gonna leave the Hangout and then refresh, so it'll be better.
Okay.
It happens to my Hangout sometimes.
Okay.
Okay, I'm back.
Are you back? Okay. What do you think?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, then that's good. All right, it's fine now.
All right. Okay. I guess the thing the crux of the thing is what we were talking about is that well, actually, I should ask you, what was the last thing that the point
You're talking about private property and how it could mitigate externalities.
Oh yeah, and then you brought up the idea that that they create this wealth disparity and then can create manipulations and so on.
Right. And then I'd also bring up the idea. I also have to say that there's a problem when we say, okay, well, people can have private property rights, so exclusive rights of control over a given thing. But then you also have to account for the collective effect on that given thing, and so people have to have a say, in how they're being affected. That's not exclusive. I mean, well, I'm not going to make that point. Actually, it's a bad point. Never mind.
Okay. All right. So, yes, there are times where we experience a kind of like a feedback that occurs because of multiple different things, factors influencing things, and we start to create problems that end up, as a whole, being significantly, a significant issue, whereas as an individual, they're not. Is what you're kind of claiming, right?
I mean, I'm just saying that the distribution system of capitalism often leads to huge wealth monopolies that give people.
That's false, though. That's a false claim. That's a claim that was made by a lot of the original anarchists who were very vehement about it. And realistically, they have no science to prove it. They have no logic or reason to prove it. They have no evidence to prove it, because every single one of the ones that every single one of the cases that I've ever put forth, every person that I put forth from the ANCOM position or from the communist position, where I've asked them to demonstrate to me what it is that they're talking about, where it's actually happened. They come forward and provide, they'll say Alcoa, or they'll say De Beers Diamonds, or they'll say the meat packing things in the Midwest in America. These circumstances were heavily dependent, not just heavily, entirely dependent upon government largesse in order to exist.
There's a problem with that, though.
Uh-huh.
My problem with when people get into the not real capitalism stuff, my problem with that is, number one, what makes you think that people are not going to, and this is like the problem that I see with an ANCAP analysis of that.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, in a system based on kind of blind appropriation, you're going to have kind of wealth disparities. And what happens is, as wealth disparities get
you're going to have to clarify blind appropriation, please.
Right. So I was actually just talking about that.
Okay.
Basically, in the capitalist distribution system, the market is based on kind of exchanges. So instead of intelligent collective coordination, you have these kind of random, individual exchanges, taking place with the preference of individuals rather than, the preference of the whole group and the information that the whole group can kind of bring to the table. So what's happening is you're having the separation of people who are participating in the economy, and so there's not collective coordination. That ultimately leads, when you have that kind of blind economic action, it kind of ultimately leads to these large wealth monopolies. And then that leads to those people being corrupted by the power that they have with those large wealth monopolies, and then using those wealth monopolies to corrupt other people in their interests, and then creating violent social bodies like the state to enforce the rules that they want to enforce. That's been like the history of the capitalist system. Like, that's how it actually got cemented as a world economic system.
Okay. Well, first thing, number one, we do have a system by which these things are accomplished. It's called supply and demand, utilizing a means of facilitation of trade, typically called currency. Okay. Now, the fact is that currency is currently monopolized in various different regions. Mm-hmm. And currency has been manipulated by governments for a very, very long period of time. Before that, there were competing currencies which had growing pains, that had difficulties. But in general, if you had competing currencies, you found that stabilization of value, as far as these people provide a currency that is trustworthy and we can continue to use it within certain trading routes. Things like merchant law and so on, facilitating this type of thing. Mm. The coordination of efforts in the price system is what, as far as what happens with the use of materials and so on, it creates an understanding that, all right, well, yes, I don't necessarily need to know exactly how much rubber will be allocated towards X, Y, or Z venture, because all I'm interested in is how much rubber I'm going to get for my tires for my car. And then another person's interested in how much rubber they're going to get for their, I don't know, swing set or whatever it happens to be. Okay, there's a variety of different uses for rubber, and what happens is that we create the supply and demand curves, and you don't even have to draw them up, but it's cool to understand them. But in reality, what happens is that as something becomes more scarce and more in demand, the price of it goes up. It becomes more and more valued as a commodity. But I guess that's really not necessarily the thing that I was sticking on. The thing that I was sticking on was the fact that this idea that it creates these monopolies or wealth centers that are just insanely wealthy, which is not true. Okay, if we look at early industries in which the governments got involved hardly at all. Okay, where free markets were, essentially had free reign. I don't know. I'll take, for example, vision correction surgery or cosmetic breast implantation surgery when they first started. These industries created a very desirable product that was very expensive to start with because technology was new and so on. There was risk that was associated with it. Only the wealthy really got into it.
Mm-hmm.
But then what happened is the prices dropped and plummeted, and quality rose and rose and rose very quickly, to the point where a person of very little means could actually obtain a vision correction, through LASIK or whatever the new technologies that exist are. Okay, and the number of providers of these services was still extraordinarily large. In fact, grew over time. It didn't shrink into one monopolistic provider or one monopolistic conglomeration of providers. Okay, and then if you look at something that is heavily regulated, as far as foreign trade, foreign commerce, and transportation, then you can take a look at Walmart and you can see, well, what the hell happened with Walmart? Walmart's about the same kind of thing. I mean, basically all you have is somebody saying, all right, well, I'm going to move this thing over from here to here, and instead of it being, an like a brass plastic thing, moving it from some factory over there and putting it into your boob. Okay, well, why is it that now it's suddenly just huge, beyond, dwarfing all others as far as this economic wealth? I mean, I'm not saying that Walmart's is the most wealthy company on the planet. I don't know which one is, but whatever it happens to be, they've had this gigantic influence from governments around the world, whether it be China's policies regarding investment and ownership of property in China, whether it's India specifically limiting the number of limiting technology and preventing looms from being made there. There's all sorts of things that are just screwing the whole thing up. So, the no true Scotsman thing is not a claim that you can actually legitimately claim, all right? Because we're talking about free, uninterrupted trade. In the definition of what it is we're talking about, you can't say, well, then what about all the government-interfered stuff that's going on there? That's not what we're talking about, and it's not a no true Scotsman thing. We're talking about two different things.
Well, I'm just wondering, since anarcho-capitalism seems to be a hypothetical thing.
Yeah.
Well, are there any examples of anarcho-capitalism working in a society in, say, the past 200 years? I just want an example of a society. Anarcho-capitalist society.
Can I address his point first?
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So I just wanted to address that because it's an interesting point. You're talking about theories of kind of market equilibrium, where supply and demand will lead to a kind of evening out of the market before you. And so you were going into like that. And that's based on what's called it's a part of neoclassical economics, right? And the problem with that particular theory was that it didn't account for it simply didn't account for rudimentary changes. So changes in the amount of raw materials, changes in values, changes in the environment. So seasonal changes, it just didn't account for that. And so it fundamentally falls on its face as a theory because it doesn't account for rudimentary stuff like that. Also about the prices, you're talking about the prices go up and down for supply and demand. That's actually not true. What happens, that was based on Austrian price theory, and Austrian price, there were a few Austrian economists that actually went out and studied how Austrian price theory fit into how businesses practiced, just Austrian theory in general, not even just price theory, and it generally had nothing to do with how businesses work. They completely disregard, they completely disregarded the theory, how the Austrian economists thought they were doing things, and completely differently. So, for example, with the prices, the prices aren't set by supply and demand usually. The predominant form of pricing in modern day capitalist economies is where prices are set even before the production process begins.
Oh, sure.
And thus, you have what's called markup pricing, where instead of, kind of supply and demand dictating the price, you have supply and demand dictating the amount of product that is on the shelf. And so what happens is you have, through the capitalist authority over production, you have a price being imposed on the population, and the consumer has no more choice in the price anymore.
Okay, well, the thing is, again, in this statist-run economy, we're dealing with an incredibly tainted environment. Now, let's take a look at an actual supply and demand system.
It simply has to do with the nature of private property. It simply has to do with the fact that some people...
I'll give you an example, and you tell me where I'm wrong.
But that's the thing. What I was talking about before, the only reason that they're able to set these prices at before the production process, the only reason they're able to do markup pricing is because people have there is authoritarian modes of production. So some people own vast amounts of wealth and property. That's the only way. That's the only way they're able to impose these kinds of these prices.
And
because,
again,
consumers rely on them because consumers rely on them.
Yeah.
For, goods, the distribution of goods, and so what happens is they have to now submit to those prices because it's being done universally across the map, and so they have nowhere else to go.
All right. Well, I've got a couple of questions that I need to respond to. So, if you give me the moment. In fact, this is going to have to be the end of the conversation because we are reaching the end of the call. So, I'll try to answer them and then give you guys an opportunity to plug any opportunities for people to come and check out what your work is. All right. So we had a question that came from Patrick. Please give me an example of anarcho-capitalism working within, anything within the last 200 years. Why? There's no reason for us to say that because there's never been an iPhone, that an iPhone can't work.
Well, it's just kind of helpful to have
sure.
an example of that.
Absolutely.
When you're talking about the dictatorship of the proletariat, you have examples like the Paris Commune.
Yeah. I mean, it would be so cool if we actually had a community, let's say of I don't know, let's say for some strange reason, Singapore went from being this authoritarian, we control your personal lives and all these other crap that they do, and they're a fairly free society, but in general, they've got a lot of authoritarian interferences with life. And if we took Singapore and just had to become an ANCAP country and just see what happened, that would be awesome. We would be able to get to an understanding as to how it worked. And there's people who are proposing things like seasteading in order to do this. The problem with the seasteading thing, I think, is because that realistically, land isn't very expensive. Land is actually a very cheap thing to have. Its problem is land. It's land without government telling you what you can do with it. Is not cheap. Actually, let the real world of how supply and demand. There's a ton of supply of land, arable land. Enough for 5 1/4 square acres for every single person on the planet, including okay. So if we actually had the ability for people to go out and homestead land and have government be completely segregated and not able to interfere and not have nothing to do with it, then we could actually see what would happen. All right, and I would love to see that experiment happen, and it's great. But it does not undermine the philosophy not one bit, because as we've seen, there have been things that have come out of nothing, that we couldn't predict.
It makes it really hypothetical. You can't really say 100% sure that this is going to be this way. You can't really make sweeping claims about no true Scots, about anarcho-capitalist societies being free of monopolies and that sort of thing.
No, well, I can show exactly why it doesn't happen. But again, this is it is theoretical, but there are when you're dealing with theoretical.
No, it's hypothetical theory.
Okay, it's hypothetical, theoretical. It's still a cogitation experiment. People exploring things in the mind using logic and reason, not evidence. Okay? Because the only way you can get evidence is by putting things into practice. So yes, we have to actually create something and let it run its course, and so we can see what it would happen.
I've heard like there were an example of an anarcho-capitalist society would be like medieval Iceland.
Not exactly. There's some.
I really don't like when ANCAPs say that. It bugs the crap out of me.
Yeah, it's actually it's fairly tribal, more so than anarcho-capitalist, I would say. It's kind of
like it wasn't anything resembling like free market capitalism or the NAP. You had basically Viking tribes warring with each other. Like that's
it's certainly.
I've just heard some anarcho-capitalists point to that, and
I've heard it too.
Really
it's a weak sauce attempt to argue with a status that's being used.
Right.
And you guys should basically say, well, you know what, you don't have to waste that crap on us.
Right.
It's really not an argument that it's not a point that I will ever bring up in an argument with an ANCOM. Okay, both of us have figured out that the state is a bad thing. The next thing is whether we accept that you own the fruits of your labor, which includes capital, or whether you own the fruits of your labor, which includes use or something like that. And I'm not sure exactly if I got a clear understanding of what it is that you guys are clearly saying, but the use idea, I think we have a problem with that because you guys still accept personal property, but we'll have to get into that in another discussion. And then also just to do a quick recap there, did you had a question that Jake that I didn't get to? That was the second question.
No, I didn't actually.
Okay, all right. So we've addressed everything. All right. So at this point, then, I just want to thank everybody who has been watching, who's been participating in the chat there. Sorry, I wasn't able to ask your question to our guest, Kinshi. We'll have to get back to it at some other time, and I'm definitely going to have to see about getting an increase in the length of the show because it just looks like we've got so much to talk about that we're missing out on a lot of opportunities.
Who was that user asking the question? I might be able to go in the comments. He was asking.
Well, the comments end up going haywire after I close the conversation.
Right.
So if you wanted to discuss that, though, certainly you could join. I don't know. It's hard.
I'll likely be on here again, so
Yeah. He'll come on and talk with us about all sorts of stuff. He's got a significantly different version of anarcho-capitalism than most. But anyway, at this point in time, though, I do want to give you one last chance before we go. Where should we go to check out the stuff that you guys put out?
I'll let Patrick go first.
There's a ton of media for basically Marxist.
No, your stuff, the stuff that you make. Where do you have a podcast?
I don't have a podcast. I'm sorry. I'm just not really a professional. I just sometimes join.
Okay, well, thank you for joining. I really appreciate your input. Unfortunately, we didn't have a chance to get more from you, but certainly, in the future, maybe another time. And then also from you, Jake.
Yeah, I have a YouTube channel called Red and Black Revolutionary. Just type that in. It's all one word, all lowercase, and there's if you've ever seen that little hammer and sickle emoticon, it's on both sides of the word. So just copy and paste that from Wikipedia and put it on both sides of the
and it's red and black, not red ampersand black.
Yeah, no, it's just Red and Black Revolutionary.
Sometimes people use the and sign. Use the word and, A-N-D.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again for joining me, Jake, and thanks for joining us for the first time, Patrick, and thanks again for everybody watching. Hope you have a great weekend.